Okay, thank you very much, Professor Darshan Bhai. I'm very happy to be with all of you for this session on stability assessment and role of entity. Uh, Usually, whenever we have a technical webinar, people do talk about technical things only. But I would like to add one thing here in what Professor Darshan Bhai has suggested to all of you is that I am a certified scuba diver also, and usually whenever I go and deliver a technical log, first I would like to send a message of water conservation and conservation of oceans. So I'll just take a couple of minutes to convey this to you that water is very important. Ecology of our environment is very important, and we must all strive together to conserve the water. Whatever steps that we have been taking currently for conservation of environment are related to land part only. That is, we try to get rid of the pollution on the land on which we reside, or to which or to the land which are highly populated, disrespecting the fact that the whole earth is covered by 70% water and the land part is only 30%. And whenever we talk about environmental conservation or conservation of our green initiatives that we have been talking about recently, is only restricted to part of land that is habited. So out of 30% of the surface of the earth which is covered with land, rarely 50% of that part is habited. So whatever efforts that we are making for environmental conservation is restricted rarely to 25% of the total surface of the earth, absolutely disregarding the 70% part which is covered by water. And the ecology of ocean is very important. So I would like to convey to all of you that please strive hard to conserve the environment by conserving the water also, because it creates a great role in ecological balance. जैसे आप सब ने ड्यूरिंग इंटरमीडिएट और सेकेंडरी स्टडी ऑल्सो आपने पढ़ा होगा वाटर साइकिल. तो वाटर साइकिल चालू होती है समंदर से, ओशन से. पानी इवापोरेट होता है, जाके बादल बनते हैं और बादल कूल होता है और फिर वो लैंड पे बारिश के रूप में वापस आता है. So unless and until we don't strive hard to conserve the ocean, to the ecological balance of the ocean, to the marine life that is beneath the ocean, we are not going to be completely achieving our target of having a pollution free or conservation of environment. और ये सब जो efforts है वो collectively तो अच्छी बनती ही है, but individually also आप हर आदमी जो इसको अटेंड कर रहे हैं, इंक्लूडिंग मी, दर्शन भाई, एवरीवन हु इज लिसनिंग टू दिस, individually also we can start conservation of water so that we can have a good ecological balance in the earth. Global warming and other phenomena, they are related to ocean. So if we try hard to contribute in a whatever small way that we have been doing, I feel we should be able to conserve the water, the ocean, which covers 70% of the earth. More important is that life started in ocean. पानी में ही शुरुआत हुई है. आप अगर कहीं पे भी जाए और कोई भी रिलीजन का माइथोलॉजी भी देखे, तो एवरीवन हैज अप्रूव्ड दैट द लाइफ स्टार्टेड इन वाटर. इवन हमारा भी जन्म जो हुआ है, तो व्हेन वी वर इन द वॉर्म ऑफ आवर मदर, वी वर सराउंडेड बाय अ लिक्विड मीडिया. So that is why also it is important कि जब तक पानी है तब तक जीवन है. So please try and try hard to conserve water. Okay, now let us get back to the topic of stability assessment and role of NDT. We have been discussing a lot over previous many days with Professor Darshan Bhai Gandhi. So I think the medium of communication, I'm audible to everyone. That's what I feel, and my screen is also visible to all of you very easily. I can see there are around 64 participants currently, and the audio is very clear to all of them. I was informed that perhaps yeah, I can read those chats now. I was informed that there will be a lot of students, academicians, as well as professional people who will be participating in this thought, in this particular talk on stability assessment and role of it. What I would like to convey to you today is that this particular talk has been devised in such a way that it neither focuses purely on academics nor it focuses purely on professionalism. So it has been a perfect, perhaps a perfect blend of academics and professionalism, and I hope that something good will come out of it, because nowadays academic institutions are also trying to get industries associated with their jobs, as well as industries do also need academic input a lot. So this particular talk has been kind of formed in such a way that it bridges a gap between academics and industry or professionalism as far as the topic of stability assessment is concerned. Second thing which I would like to put before you is that whenever we are going to talk about stability assessment, though it is going to be applicable to all type of structures, but primarily the concern of stability assessment is more for building frames. So whatever discussion we have been, I will be presenting before you. Keep building frames in mind so that it will be very easy to grasp and understand. Third thing is that perhaps this presentation will not have hi-fi calculations or kind of buckling theory or Euler's formation of stability equations and nothing sort of those things. In a very practical sense, what actually stability means and how the buildings are assessed for confirming the stability, or whether the stability assessment is the only thing that we should look forward to, or it should be extended to other fronts also. So this I would trying to cover all these things in such a way that academics is related to that. Most important is would try to cover the basics. Because without basics nothing happens. Over past 30 years of my career, I have seen that people usually get lost in equations and keep apart the basics. So even the basics are wrong, the equations could be right. So here, what I have thought is that we will focus on basics, on stability assessment and related role of NDT. So the first thing which I would like to emphasis is that structures also have got emotional attachments. They are also like human beings. They get older like we get old. They get sick like we get sick. They also need periodic checkup. They also need regular treatments whenever they fall sick, and they may also be placed on life support. Structures will maintain a good health only if we care for it. Otherwise, if we neglect them, they would be like a child which is not under the control of their parents. So it is very important that we must focus on the well-being of structures during its useful lifespan. Now, why this type of assessment is required for buildings? I have listed down some of the parameters. So these are the phases when actual assessment of a building. You may call it stability assessment. You may call it structural condition assessment of a building. These situations will call for this purpose. One is sale and purchase of a building. Whenever I am going to purchase a new building, I must try to find out that though the building is 20 years old, whether it befits to the requirement of its health and safety or not. Periodic maintenance, I think nowadays government has also made it compulsory that for any reinforced concrete building which are more than 15 years old should get periodically inspected every 5 years or every 3 years, and a certificate in the form of stability or structural inspection should be obtained and maintained in record and should be submitted to the local authority. I understand that all over Gujarat, this is the scenario that any RCC building which is more than 15 years old, we should have a structural inspection every 5 years and submit a report of that structural inspection along with a stability certificate to the local authority. Hope other people from other states are also joining this webinar. I am sure that the situation in other states would also be same. Whenever there is a change in configuration of, like people may would like to have horizontal expansion of a building, or they may would like to have a vertical expansion of the building, so that is we call change in configuration of the building. At that time also the assessment would be required. Repair rehabilitation, over a period of time there is a degradation in the materials that are used in building. There may be a change of use, so under all those circumstances you would certainly require to assess the structural condition of the building. Well, retrofit for changes in codal provisions. Though the building has not deteriorated, though the materials of the buildings are performing very well as on today, but they have been constructed 15 years before, complying to the code of practice which were prevailing at that particular point of time. Now the codes have revised, especially after post-earthquake. There is a lot of emphasis on revision of codes for earthquake and wind, as well as for IS 456 also. So current provisions of the codes will call for retrofitting for all those buildings which are constructed considering the old codes. For example, if I just put it straightly before you, that buildings which are constructed with M15 grade of concrete were correct at that particular point of time because M15 was accepted as a structural concrete. Now, over the last few years, with introduction of changes in relevant codes, the minimum structural grade of concrete has been declared as M20. So this certainly is a matter of concern for all those buildings which has been constructed complying to the old codes of practice. And as I told you, one reason would be the requirement of the authority, because nowadays they demand that every 5 years you should have your building inspected and you must submit a certificate of stability. So now, coming to this particular aspect, a stability certificate. I have seen that many structural engineers were involved in this type of work and were demanded a certificate of stability, especially after a havoc situation was created or whenever some kind of natural disaster takes place. I'm talking about the 2001 Bhuj earthquake, because immediately after that, a lot of people have been very much worried about how their building will perform, and the authority has also declared that we must obtain a stability certificate of all the buildings in Gujarat. So, what actually is this stability certificate, or what exactly do we mean by stability? That is what I would like to ask. So, if you would like to share your thoughts on what is stability of a building, or what do we exactly mean by stability, you can write that in the chat box, or you would like to communicate to us in any other form. What are your idea when we exactly talk about stability? What would you like to tell us? What comes to your mind? So one is saying life expectancy. Avi Gandhi has said that. Other people can also share their ideas. What exactly do we mean by stability? When we try to assess a stability of a structure, what exactly do we mean by that? So Keval is saying it is durability of structure. Dipali is saying stability against all types of loads. Yeah, Dharam Thakkar is saying stable in worst condition. Krishna Patel is saying strength of all materials. I have started receiving very good response to this question. Mehul is saying should be stable by complying all provisions of code. Uma Shankar Yaligar is saying lifespan of materials. My question is very specific. What exactly do we mean by stable? Yes, Shivang Dabi has said it is equilibrium with all forces. Equilibrium condition of forces should be satisfied. Mayur Bhandarkar is saying it is fit for its performance. Mehul is saying equilibrium. Bhupendra Kumar is saying capacity versus demand. Keyur Patel is saying being stable. Exactly, but being stable, what do we exactly mean by being stable? I think we had a very good brainstorming, and I see that a very responsive participants and webinar audience is there who keep on interacting with the speaker. So I really appreciate your efforts in this interaction and this brainstorming that we have had about what exactly do we mean by stability. I can see Ismail Vora has said can sustain in any type of threats. Okay, I will get back to this stability very soon. What exactly do we mean by stability? Now, assessment of building. Just after this slide, we will be talking about what exactly do we mean by stability. See, assessment of a building is a multifold process. So first, I would like to condemn the efforts of the authority who would be demanding a stability certificate, which is not the correct thing to do, because the whatever you have typed in the chat, including life expectancy, durability, or equilibrium, or whatever you have said, everything is related to performance of the building, life of the building over a period of huge many years. When I talk about huge many years, like our life, average life of an Indian citizen is 65 years. And we also say that a building should have a useful lifespan of 60 years. So it is comparable to our life. So only stability certificate will not be used to declare that a particular building is safe. The safety of the building comprises of many things other than stability also. So when exactly we try to assess a condition of the building, as far as structural conditions of the buildings are concerned, we should have stability assessment. That is one part of it, which I'm going to talk about extensively in following duration of this lecture in following slides. The second part, sorry. The second part is strength assessment of various components of the building. The third part is stiffness assessment of various components of the building. And the fourth part, which I am saying, is condition assessment, which in fact is covered in all 1, 2, and 3 parts of that I have mentioned to you before. See, when this concept of stability started long time before, the general idea among civil engineers, because you all people are new generation people, I believe, who are very much acquainted with computers. But I'm talking about an era when computers did not exist, the softwares did not exist. What people used to do is, people used to go to the site or the building for inspection. Just go inspect the building and find out whether there are cracks or not, if they are structural cracks or they are normal other cracks other than structural components. Inspect the building, and if they feel it is okay, they would use to certify the building as being stable without entering into any calculations or without considerations to any other aspects of the building. Just based on the visual inspection, they used to certify that the building is stable. The idea which was put before the other engineers sometimes who would question that how can we certify stability of a building based on visual inspection. The usual answer which they used to get in those days, I'm talking about the time when computers did not existed, but the stability certification was there even at that time. They used to say कि यार इतने साल से बिल्डिंग खड़ा है, 15-20 साल से तो खड़ा है, उसको कुछ हुआ नहीं. लातूर का अर्थक्वेक भी आ चुका था, फिर भी उसको कुछ हुआ नहीं, तो वो स्टेबल ही है. So the general concept and the idea during those days was that a building has maintained its posture over so many years of time in the life which has passed for that particular building, and therefore it is stable. Because उसको कुछ हुआ ही नहीं, 20 साल से बिल्डिंग खड़ा है, एक दो बार अर्थक्वेक भी आ चुका, एक दो बार फ्लड भी आ चुका, फिर भी उसको कुछ हुआ नहीं है. तो let us go and inspect the building. If there are not significant damages that you find in terms of cracks or dilapidation or kind of loose cover concrete or reinforcement rusting, go and certify the building as it is a stable building. Do we all mean that it is a stable building just based on these particular criteria and visual inspection? Then I have a very big question for you. This photograph is taken from Turkey. Now, I mean, there are so many other structures which exist in our country also. Like, for example, in I think around Bangalore, there is a huge boulder called Krishna's Butterball, which is also resting on in a public place. It is placed, and several years it has maintained its position. But even if you look at it, you will certainly say that it is unstable. See, can you see this particular rock that I am trying to highlight to you here? Would you see this rock? Which let me try to highlight that rock here.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, this particular rock, right? So, can we see that? Can you? It is there since ages. I feel more than 100 years. This is from Turkey. It has maintained its postures over all these years of its life, maybe more than 100 years. So, can we say that it is stable based on the usual concept that was in existence before the time of computers, based on the experience of a structural engineer? Do you feel is it safe to sit on this rock? No, perhaps not. I am just trying to push the slide through. Yeah. So the idea which I wanted to convey is that if a building maintain its posture, as you see now, it means that it is in equilibrium. It does not mean that it is stable. Why it does not mean that it is stable? Because there are several aspects related to equilibrium which all of us have studied in past. A building has to maintain its equilibrium throughout its lifetime. That too under the action of different types of forces expected to act on it during its life. That's it. That is what has come out from all the brainstorming that we had done. That the building should be stable against all expected forces, was possible combination of loads that it is likely to be subjected to during its useful lifespan. Right. So when we say a building has to be stable, this is the essence that I would like to convey. That word stability refers to a type of equilibrium. Every one of us has studied during our engineering mechanics, strength of material, or structural analysis and design that there are three types of equilibrium positions that could be there for any structure, including buildings. One is stable type of equilibrium, other is neutral type of equilibrium, and third is unstable type of equilibrium. Now, all these three type of equilibriums can maintain a good posture over several years of time. So, a building could be in stable form of equilibrium, it could be in neutral form of equilibrium, or it could be in unstable form of equilibrium. The boulder that I shown you in that slide of a Turkey was in equilibrium. No doubt about that. It was there over last 100 years. No doubt about that. It will continue to be there over next 100 years. No doubt about that. But the point of concern for engineers is that the equilibrium position which it has occupied is the third category, which we call as unstable form of equilibrium. Right? So what we need to do is we need to get rid of this unstable form of equilibrium because it is a great compromise with safety that we refer to and that we refer to in our codes of practice. So now just get back to the basics that what is a stable form of equilibrium. So whenever a force is applied on a particular structure, right, the structure or its component will undergo certain type of deflections or deformations. And when the force is removed, it will regain its original position. It will regain its original geometry, right? So that we call as a stable form of equilibrium, which is very much preferred in buildings at all the times. That is what the code has said. And that is what we mean by stability. When we say stability assessment, we mean to assess that the building would remain in a stable form of equilibrium throughout its lifespan and should not cross over to a neutral type of equilibrium or an unstable type of equilibrium. I'm sure that we are talking about something which is very relevant, which is very easy, which is very basics, which is very conceptual. But people would have missed it the way it is to be considered, or the way like we will be discussing in next few slides. See, one should keep in mind that the building tries to occupy a new state of equilibrium whenever a force is applied to it, right? For example, if it is in a stable state of equilibrium, you apply a force, building will remain in the stable state of equilibrium, right? Or it may cross over to a different form of equilibrium, which could be neutral form of equilibrium, or it may cross over to a different form of equilibrium, which could be unstable form of equilibrium. Right now, I have made a simple slide to convey to all of you that generally a building passes through different types of equilibrium positions before it reaches an unstable state just prior to collapse. And that slide is here. See, what I have taken is I have taken a very simple two-dimensional frame which is subjected to a lateral load. Whenever we talk about stability, I think lateral load is the prime concern for stability. That also I will highlight how we have to account for it in actual quantification of stability of a building. That also we will talk. But let us again focus on basics. A simple frame. I'm talking about frame A here. This is which is subject to a load, a lateral load, a point load. Say for example, it is a two-dimensional frame made of two columns and one beam, right? Okay, when we apply a load and keep on increasing the load, what happens is the frame will undergo a lateral displacement, right? So this is the lateral load and sway P delta curve for this particular frame. So you keep on applying the increasing the load, right? So the graph will move like this from A to point B, right? It's a straight line curve because we assume that stress and strain are linear. They have got a linear relations with each other, and it is an elastic material, right? Now, during this tenure of load increments from A to B, if you remove the load, the building will occupy the original position, right? So it is in a stable state of equilibrium. So here what I have written is A to B is a phase of stable equilibrium, right? Now a point will come when the capacity of this particular column, the left column of the frame, has exhausted. The moment of the moment capacity of the column at the bottom is like someone has said that it is a supply and demand, right? So the capacity of this particular column at the base, for example, this is a hypothetical situation, has exceeded the demand has exceeded the capacity at this particular point here, right? What will happen is a hinge formation will take place. As soon as the first hinge formation takes place, there is a great change in the lateral stiffness of the frame. As the lateral stiffness of the frame changes under the action of same force, for example, P, the force which was there at point B, under the same force, the frame will undergo a displacement without any increment in the load, which is shown by a yellow dotted line, right? Now, so the frame has got a new configuration now, which is B, which has got one plastic hinge formed at the bottom of the left column. Again, you keep on increasing the frame, increasing the load, lateral load. What happens is it will again undergo a lateral displacement to certain extent. On removal of the load, it will get back to the original position, which is defined by frame B, not by frame A, right? So here what is happening is A to B is a stable state of equilibrium. The yellow dotted line which I have showed here, B to B, is a neutral state of equilibrium. Again, B to C is a stable state of equilibrium. you further keep on increasing the load, the plastic hinges formation will take place. For example, in C frame, which I have shown here, there are two plastic hinges formed at the bottom of both the columns, right? So that is C to C, which is a yellow dotted line which I have shown, is again a neutral state of equilibrium. If you further keep on increasing the load, what will happen is one more hinge formation will take place in column or at some other place, and again a fourth hinge formation will take place. For this particular type of structure, as we all know, that four hinges forms, and then it is absolutely a structure wherein the collapse mechanism has formed, and any further increase in the load will lead to collapse of the structure, right? So what I mean to say is, I just wanted to demonstrate to you that a building through its lifespan, when it is subjected to expected forces, passes through different forms of equilibrium, which I try to illustrate with the help of this simple two-dimensional frame, conveying that it could be a stable form of equilibrium, it could be a neutral form of equilibrium, it could be a stable form of equilibrium again. Finally, unless the mechanism forms for which leads to collapse, right, and that we call as an unstable form of equilibrium. So frame E here would obviously depict an unstable form of equilibrium. We don't want to have structures which are in unstable form of equilibrium, because if it is subjected to any external disturbance of appropriate magnitude, it will lead to collapse, right? So this is what I wanted to highlight to you, that a building like us, we also face several situations, sometimes high, sometimes lows in our life. Likewise, buildings would also face different types of situations, sometimes high, sometimes low, in terms of its equilibrium, and we must ensure at all the times it remains within the state of stable equilibrium without crossing over to unstable equilibrium, which is a great concern for all structural engineers. Now, how does a building loses its stability? See, we are talking about stability already. We are not talking about strength, we are not talking about thickness of the building, we are purely focusing on stability. Well, you must have come across several collapses of buildings, or may have read about that in the newspaper, or may have gone through the photographs that are available on Google. So the building can lose its stability in two ways. One is local instability, the other is global instability. The local instability could be in terms of individual members, like I have seen several buildings where only slab will collapse. Okay, so as a particular, for example, if a building is of 5 stories, the ground floor, one component of slab will collapse, right? So that is local instability. Sometimes what happens is slab on the 6th floor will collapse. A particular drawing room slab of a typical floor buildings on the 6th floor will collapse because someone was doing kind of breaking work or making a flooring over there. That 6th floor slab will collapse. It falls on the 5th floor. Because of that impact, the 5th floor slab would also collapse, and subsequently leads to collapse of all the slab panels from ground floor to the floor where the collapse initiated, right? So, but still, this will fall under the category of a local collapse or local collapse because of local instability of individual members, right? So it could be collapse of beams, it could be collapse of slab, it could be collapse of water tank, or sometimes cantilever projections. For example, cantilever balconies are more prone because they have been subjected to weather effects also, and the deterioration takes faster. Sometimes it is local collapse of a column also. I have also seen buildings where a particular column has absolutely deteriorated, but because the other outside columns redistribution of loads takes place to surrounding columns, the building will sustain. So what I mean to say is that these are local instabilities which can occur in a building, and if it does not lead to chain reaction, then the consequences may be accepted, right? That it does not lead to chain reaction, it does not lead to overall instability, global instability in the building, overall collapse of the building, then it may be acceptable. But we have to be very careful about this, because we have come across buildings wherein the terrace floor water tank has collapsed onto terrace slab, and leading to collapse of the whole building, because sometimes the slab spans are so huge that it will also affect the columns which are on the perimeter of those slabs, and it will lead to collapse of the columns also, right? So this is one part, how the buildings can get the local instability. The other is global cell, which is actually progressive collapse of individual members or assembly of members leading to collapse of the whole building. In fact, the two-dimensional frame which I had just demonstrated to you, discussed with you, was an example of a progressive collapse analysis. And as you all would have heard the word pushover analysis, that was nothing but it was a pushover analysis. Whatever we have been doing has been only within the kind of domain of elasticity and a linear stress strain relationship that we have been talking about. But this pushover analysis will prove to you, including the graph which I had shown you, first phase, second phase, third phase, fourth phase, because the stiffness changes. So all actual behavior of a building during progress of a collapse would be a non-linear. Even though we do all our analysis, assuming that stress is directly proportional to strain, or assuming that everything follows the rules of elasticity. Because as soon as a hinge forms, the lateral stiffness will change. As far as the stiffness will change, the behavior, P delta behavior, will take on to the nonlinear form in segment. So it is so what we do is we do a non-linear analysis in segmental forms, and each segment of that analysis will pertain to linear analysis, and we'll stick to all the assumptions that we have made. So that was actually a basic, I would say, a basic explanation of the pushover analysis also, when I tried to explain to you that progressive collapse. Okay. Now, the global instability can occur because of unexpected type of forces also, which may not have been considered in design. For example, a blast load, right? For example, a vehicular impact could also lead to, because see, a lot of people have been designing high-rise buildings, keeping in mind the parking at the ground floor level. But have you ever thought about impact of a vehicle on a particular column, or whether the columns have been designed for that parking? No, I don't think so. Right? For example, if I have a vehicle which weighs around 5 tons or maybe around 7 tons today, now for you get a good car of Ford, a very huge car, it itself weighs around 4 to 5 tons. If it sometimes people, drunken people, may come and at a speed of 30-40 kilometers per hour and just have a good impact of that car onto a particular column. If the column is not designed for this vehicular impact, I am sure it will lead to collapse of that particular column and will create a chain reaction where the whole building will collapse. Right? I do recollect certain episodes from my professional practice that such things has actually happened on buildings. Okay, terrorist attack. It's a new type of load which all structural engineers should consider. Right? So, for example, we are designing buildings in the areas which are more likely to have terrorist attack on the borders. Say, for example, on India and Pakistan border. I think all important buildings for which we design for earthquake should also be considered for a terrorist attack. So we may design those buildings for a specified intensity of terrorist attack. For example, if a terrorist comes with a detonator or a explosive powder in a backpack and comes in, and he's a suicide bomber, right? And for example, a backpack will contain 5 kg or 10 kg of explosive, right? And if he suicide bomber will blow himself up, what would be the impact of this explosion on the building? Say 10 kg of TNT, right? So we should also design our buildings for this type of terrorist attacks where it is likely to happen. Okay, earthquake and cyclones are the common forces for which the codal provisions are there. I think for blast also a lot of research is available. You can design your buildings for blast. Vehicular impact also, some guidelines are available in the course of practice, but perhaps all designers are disrespecting these things, which should also be keep in mind as far as we are talking about stability or assessment of it. So, I think we have been almost through in understanding what stability is. Okay, it is a type of equilibrium which we should look forward to in all the buildings. But I have a question for all of you. To achieve just stable equilibrium is enough? No, it is not. It is not enough for a building to just have a stable equilibrium. It must possess adequate safety margin for stability. Okay. Now, see, we talk about design. You all know that we have safety margins on design in terms of what? load factors, in terms of material factors. For example, on steel, we use a factor of 1.15. So whatever is the yield strength or proof stress of the steel, we divide it by 1.15, and that we use in our design. For concrete also, I think we use a factor of 0.44 of FCK, which is made up of two different types of factors. One is geometry factor and the other is actual safety. So we have got partial factors of safety that we use for materials. What about stability? Because stability comes first, followed by I will say strength aspect and stiffness aspect. See, all these are interrelated, but I am trying to bifurcate all three into three different categories for better understanding of the behavioral structure, right? So it must possess adequate safety margin for stability. What I am going to show you next is again very basic, right? But not considered in design. So I am showing you now three types of stable equilibrium. Okay, the first one on the left side is a good situation to have. Okay, this middle one again, it is a stable form of equilibrium, right? But what would you feel that margin of safety where it will be better, in the first one or in the center one? And on the right, I have shown you the best situation. So what I wanted to emphasize here is that we should have quantification of stability. We should have quantification of stability. How do we find out that a particular building is, I mean, we just currently authority also demands, or academicians also say that the building should be stable. Okay, but how stable it is? Is there a criteria to find out whether particular building is more stable than the other building? It is there. The criteria is there in academics, the criteria is there in code of practice, but seldom we'll try to find out the quantification of stability. I bet with all of you, I am sure that all of you would be using all latest softwares like ETABS, STAD, and Midas, and everything. Right? I don't have any doubt on the abilities of the computers, or I don't have any doubt on the software that we are using for analysis and design, which I also use. Right? But tell me name of one software which tells you about stability. Tell me about one software which tells you about stability. No software currently exists in the world which tells you quantification of stability. For example, your building has got a margin of safety against stability of X amount, or your building has margin of safety against stability of Y. No software tells. Let me tell you that these things does exist in codes of practice. Apart from little dot also, in 456 also, this exists. How do we quantify stability? That is a big question. Now, here I would invite your again a brainstorming here, that can you give me some idea through chat box that how do we quantify the stability, or do you have any faintest idea of how do we determine the stability of the building? Okay. Can you tell me? I see now there are 76 participants in this, and well, so Mehul has said overturning and safety. So he knows that these criteria are there. Okay, Avi Gandhi has said live and dead load, calculating live and dead load. I am waiting for a few more responses. Can you tell me how do we find out through the codes whether the building is stable or not? In fact, it is inherent virtue of a building. Only if the building is stable, then only we should proceed to analyze and design the building. So all the softwares that we have been using, I think someone is requesting remote control of your shared computer. I think admin can do that. I am just disregarding that. Okay, so people have said NDT of testing, better way of reinforcement of steel bars by performing NDT. Okay, fine. So Good thing. But this is not actually what I wanted to convey to you. Let me tell you. I am very confident that depending on the safety margin, we can evaluate the stability of buildings and market the buildings accordingly. For example, those who are into the profession of buildings, they can tell that a particular building is more stable. Why I am charging 2000 rupees a square feet for my product? Because the stability index here is 5. While the other people may charge more because the stability index is 6, right? We should enter into an arena where this type of situation arises. So let me draw your attention to this basic clause. Again, we are talking about basics and concepts. Code provisions for safety margin for stability from IS 456 2000. Of course, the code has been revised later on, but the provisions has remained same. So stability against overturning, we must check before we do analysis of a building. Okay, what does it say? That restoring moment with 0.9 times dead load should be more than overturning moment considered by 1.2 times dead load and 1.2 times imposed loads. Restoring moment with 90% of dead load should be 1.5 times more than the overturning moment due to earthquake, and so for wind. And for sliding also, we have 90% dead load, and the sliding force should be considered with 1.5 times earthquake or wind, right? So these are the criteria set forth by the code of practice. Now, frankly, all academicians or practicing engineers who are present here, please tell me how many of you have checked this for your building before you start doing an analysis or design. I would appreciate your answer on this. Did any of you has tried to find out the factor of safety that you have against overturn and factor of safety that you have against sliding for a building that you have designed or that you have done? Well, I can see Cheta Chandan Kumawat has said, I guess none, including myself. And wherever I talk about stability and I ask this question, invariably, everyone will say that no one has tried to find out this margin of safety which is available for a building for stability. Well, that is where, the crux of the problem is. I think I would also convey to all academicians or teachers who are participating in this lecture that before you start as a structural engineer, before you start doing any analysis or design, I think this data we must teach to our students, because I feel academicians are the pioneer to all these processes of analysis and design. So they must incorporate this in their syllabus. Even no books you will find. You go through any book, you go through any RCC design book, you go through any structural analysis book, no book will talk about this, that you need to ascertain the factor of safety that you have against stability in terms of overturning or sliding. But I think we must, has been accounted in new IAS 456. Yes, correct. For local instability, it has been there in different form earlier also. But the point is, whether do we consider this before we start doing analysis or design? Perhaps not. I think we should be bold enough to accept that we have never done this. Okay. Again, I will request academicians that we should start incorporating this in syllabus in terms of simple examples of how do we find out the overturning stability margin against overturning and sliding. So it's not really difficult. It's very simple. So very simple, right? I have shown a ground plus 3-story frame here, which is subjected to gravity loads, I will say. So could be dead load, live load, and a lateral load, right? And how do we find out the overturning moment? That is because of the lateral load, say taking about the point where the rotation can take place. So it is this particular footing that I will talk about. Okay, and this restoring overturning moment should be obtained by considering 20% more load because of dead load and 40% more load because of imposed load, that is live load, right? For earthquake, it is to be 1.5 times earthquakes or wind, and the restoring moment can be obtained which is provided by these gravity loads, right? So in that case, we have to consider only 90% that. And then we need to find a factor of safety against overturning, which is equal to restoring moment divided by overturning moment. Very simple. I think a person who has graduated 12th standard with science stream can also do these calculations, right? What I have shown you here is two-dimensional frame. We can do this for three-dimensional frame also with hand calculations also. But we have always disregarded or disrespected this basic aspect of stability, which everyone should consider now onwards in that design. That is what I am believing. Okay, then what I wanted to emphasize here is, let me go back to this previous slide. The overturning moment is provided only by the lateral loads. See, that load will rarely contribute in causing instability. Okay, that load will rarely contribute in causing instability. It is the lateral load for which the stability aspect should be more strong, right? So now let me go back to my earlier narration that people used to go to the building, see there are no cracks, nothing like that, and then certify stability. When they have not considered earthquake load, they have not considered wind load, how they can just go visually inspect the building and say that the building is stable? In order to certify that the building is stable, it must ensure that the factor of safety or safety margins which are asked for overturning and sliding should be calculated. After that, only certification process can take place. That is only for certification of safety that I'm talking about. Okay, right. So one important thing which I want to emphasize here is that gravity load will seldom cause instability. Okay. Uh, well, not always true, because for simple determinate structure or partially constructed structures, the gravity load can cause instability, which I had seen in several parts. For example, self-weight of the cantilever projections. If the props are not, maintained properly, the each cantilever projection may cause instability. So that is how the structure can cause instability in partially constructed structure or in a simple determinate structure. Also, it can cause. This is a very good example of this particular bridge was under construction in Surat. You may have come across this example. This is one span, which was a curved span of the bridge. As soon as the props were removed from this curved span of the bridge, it collapsed. People wouldn't say in black and white, but I think that we must accept that it is a fault of the designer, because they satisfied all analysis criteria, they satisfied all design criteria. Okay, so the capacity provided is more than the demand. The moment which are actually expected on this has been complied by providing enough reinforcement, enough section dimensions, and enough grade of concrete. Everything was complied in calculations, but perhaps they forget to check simple calculations for stability, which should have immediately revealed that as soon as the props will be removed, this particular section of the girder would collapse. And you can see that the collapsed girder, it was completely a rigid body movement of this particular part of a bridge, which fall down on from a height of I think around 20 meters or so, and fall down on the ground without any significant damage. So strength aspect could be okay, could be complied. Stiffness aspect should be okay, could be complied, but stability aspect was missed here by perhaps the designers, and that is why the collapse has taken place. Intact, the whole box girder, curved box girder has fallen on the ground intact, except for local injuries due to the impact of the collapse, right? But otherwise, everything was in order. So this is one beautiful example where the stability aspect has been neglected by structural engineers. I don't say that has been done deliberately, but perhaps because no one has focused on calculating stability, as it does not exist in any of the books in the world, it does not exist in any of the syllabus, that to find out a safety margin and stability, right? Though it is provided explicitly in IS 456, as some of you has also mentioned in the book. Okay, now this is safe margin for sliding, which is I hope it is very evident, and we can very easily understand that the 1.5 times earthquake load will cause a sliding force, and the restoring force should be considered with 90% of dead load. Okay, now again I should put before you a very interesting thing, considering the current provisions of the code, right? The two frames I am showing. See, what we have seen up till now is a safety margin for overturning and stability, right? And we must keep in mind that none of them involve the provisions of the code does not ask for strength or stiffness or anything like that. Whatever they ask is the equations which are given are related only to loads, okay? The intensity of load, the direction of it. So loads in general and geometry, because you have to find out the lever arm to get the overturning moment or so on, right? So it is only loads and geometry which are concerned as far as stability of a building is concerned, right? So that is why I'm showing you these two frames. The frame on the left does not have any hinges, right? All joints are rigid joints. The frame on the right has got few hinges in the columns, okay? Now, do you think that both these buildings will have same margin of safety? I am saying safety, I am not saying stability. If you consider the criteria which are set for by IS 456, okay, so your answers are invited again to chat. Can you tell me whether these two frames, if you go through the equations, okay, which we have shown right now, all these both these two frames will give you same factor of safety against overturning, same factor of safety against sliding. Am I right? Just go to your chat box and give me your feedback on this. Whether these two frames have same safety margin. If you go by the stability equations that are available in code, yes. Chetan, Chandan, Kumawat has said both of them will have same overturning moment, they will have same restoring, right? Disregarding the fact that one frame has got lesser stiffness. Okay, so but actually it is not so. Both these frames will have different margin of safety before collapse, right? So that is how things will turn out. What I wish to emphasize is that stability assessment is not the only thing that we should keep in mind. There are so many other things also to do, right? Before you actually check the buildings, when you actually do the assessment of the building. Just excuse me for a while. So I am going back to this graph which I had shown you for pushover analysis, right? This could be a very primitive type of graph which I have prepared just to get the concepts right. There may be technical, there might be certain technical things or equations they may differ with this graph, but it is just to explain to you that the frame which has got lesser stiffness or the frame which has got higher stiffness. If you do the stability assessment as per codal provisions, both will have same factor of safety, but the safety margin is different. So this I had shown you earlier, which I'm showing you again. For example, frame A, the safety margin before collapse, which is available to frame A, is from point A to point E, which I have written below this particular frame, right? So from A to E is the increment of load which can be easily absorbed by frame A, okay, before collapse. Now we talk about frame B, right? For frame B, the increment of load which can be absorbed before collapse is B dash to E only, right? So these two frames are same, has got same geometry, has got same loading, but frame B has got one hinge. Therefore, the amount of load which can take before collapse is B dash to E only, while frame A can take load from A to E, right? So this is what I wanted to emphasize. Same way from frame C, the load which it can absorb is C dash to E. For D, the load which can absorb is D dash to E, while frame E cannot take any additional load. right? So it has got a zero safety margin. Fine. So what I wanted to emphasize here is, though the geometry could be same, though the intensity of load could be same, it can have a different safety margin, which is not explicitly conveyed to all of us by current codes of practice. Something needs to be done on that front also, right? Okay. So I think we had done enough discussion on stability with a few prompt, kind of feeders and the points of concerns which I wanted to discuss with you, interact with you on those fronts. That stability, what is stability? I think we had covered that. The basic aspects, it is a form of equilibrium. We should ensure that the building should always remain in stable form of equilibrium, and certifying a building on stability criteria does not ensure that the building is safe, even though it could be in an equilibrium. The building could be in equilibrium. It could be a type of different equilibrium apart from stability, right? Okay, so a building could be stable under gravity loads, but it may not be under lateral loads. We need to check that. Building may maintain its posture over long duration of time. This is image of a typical building which has suffered damage due to earthquake. It remained in its position for several months after earthquake. So, but then you cannot say that it is in stable equilibrium. Okay, so only those buildings that possess a stable state of equilibrium under all expected forces with adequate safety margin are safe for use. Others are matter of great concern for us. Now, you would be thinking that how can a building topple without any effect on its strength or stiffness? Though the strength or stiffness could be fine, building can topple. I am going to show you a few videos. I hope we have a lot of time now, at least more 15-20 minutes I think it is going to take. I'm going to show you one very interesting video of collapse of a building in my own city, Surat. Right, it's a building where no cracks were there, no damage was there, no deterioration was there. But a very good video people have captured. I have collated all those videos and prepared this video for you all to understand, because unless and until we don't understand the failure mechanism, we will not, be able to analyze and design buildings. Because failures, I mean, this is the process of learning from failures. So let us, I hope you all would be able to see small insights. It is a Firdos building. In the morning, it was normal, like all other buildings. At 8:30 in the morning, some trespassers noticed that the building is leaning. So they warned all the people around that building and asked all the people who are staying in that building to come down. A crowd gathered. You can see this all started at 8:30 in the morning. Before that, it was perfectly okay. Authority came in picture. By afternoon, the traffic was stopped. Everything around that building was clear. You can see that the building has leaned. Further leaning as the time passes by. This was at around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and around 3:30, okay. This was from very local, my own city, Surat. I am also having this another video from Philippines. Yeah, I someone has written that expand panel to show video, but these are embedded images which I think would be difficult to expand. But I have another video also which is having full screen. Okay. Do you want to see this video in the full screen? Then I will have to escape from this presentation and share another file so that I can do that, because these are already embedded videos in my presentation. I will show you one more video. Okay. And now this is from China, a very famous case of a building collapse. Okay. So on all the three videos, what I wanted to convey to you was that even the Chinese video that you had seen, we are very much afraid of China nowadays because of this corona. But I think it is a very good example. Chinese video that you had seen, the columns, the whole building overturned, and even after the collapse, also the beams and column joints were intact. The windows were intact, right? It was everything was intact. So it means that it has got adequate strength, it has got adequate thickness, but it lacked in stability. Someone has asked the reason for this collapse, which I think later on we can discuss when we open out the question answer session on one-to-one basis. It was basically the ground movements. It was basically the kind of movements which took place in the ground that all these years. And China has got a different reason, which we will talk about later. Okay. So higher is the factor of safety, more is the margin for stability. More dependable is the building, but provided that components of the buildings effectively resist expected forces while maintaining equilibrium, it means that the building should have adequate strength, the deflections or deformations within the building should be within permissible limits. It means that the building should have adequate safeness, right? So, in general terminology, we say that a stability assessment should be done. It does not relate only to assessment of stability, but it should also relate to assessment of strength and stiffness, because that also plays an important role in making the buildings and its occupants safe, right? So stability is a function of geometry and external forces, which I had already explained to you earlier, but the strength stiffness part are not duly recognized in code of practice. Very important. When I was learning, I was doing my MTech in IIT Kanpur. My teacher, Professor Dayaratan, used to tell that as we breathe air, the building breathes three things. This is basic things for a building to survive. One is stability, other is strength, and third is stiffness. So these three S are the most important for structural engineers, because our buildings are our child. Okay, our buildings are our babies. So we should care for them. And unless and until we don't provide these three parameters, good quantification of these three parameters to the buildings, I'm sure we remain more responsible for the performance of the building, good or bad, right? So these are three things which I will call as roti, kapda, and makan for a building. Like roti, kapda, and makan are the three basic essential things for human beings. Likewise, stability, strength, and stiffness are three basic essential things for a building, which is roti, kapda, and makan for them. One one measure for stability is available, like the margin, safety margin. Then what next is to be done? Next is we have to evaluate the strength and condition of the buildings. That if you are talking about concrete building, then we have to do that for concrete as well as steel, which are the main elements providing resistance to loads, right? So this is where non-destructive testing plays a major role. So earlier we had focused on stability aspect. Now we will focus on non-destructive testing for evaluation of strength and stiffness, which are also important for assessment of the building. Okay. Uh, I hope we have got enough time now. I think we will take another 20 minutes or so to go pass through all these non-destructive test methods. Am I right, Darshan bhai? Is it okay that I can take another 20 minutes more, or the participants? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Fine. Fine. Thank you very much. Okay. So now, after stability, we get back to strength and stiffness. First is strength. So how evaluation of concrete strength can take place using NDT? I am sure that many of you are aware about several methods which are available for evaluation of strength, which includes rebound hammer test, which includes ultrasonic pulse velocity test, which also includes core test. Right now, these three tests are very frequently used individually. Rebound hammer is used very extensively everywhere you go, and people will say that yeah, we had done testing of it. What type of testing they have done? They have done rebound hammer testing to arrive at the strength of a building. But before we consider the individual test of rebound hammer, I think we should know what does it reflect and what are the lacunas which are available in all these types of tests that we have been doing. Okay, according to me, the priority for testing of a building should start with core test. Even IS 456 also says that in case of key failures, you must do testing, and if everything fails, you must go to core testing. And there are certain acceptance criteria which are available in code of practice based on which you can accept or reject the concrete. And if core test fails, it proposes actual load test, right? But I have seen several people, who have been focusing on rebound hammer only, including engineering colleges. Like people from engineering college will take up a job of consulting, testing, etc. They go there and they use rebound hammer only. I'm saying rebound hammer only for testing all the columns and beams, and then say that no, the strength available is according to the design drawings provided to us, and therefore the building is safe. I think it is very dangerous thing to do, right? Ideally, I mean, based on my experience, I would say that we must incorporate, kind of combination of methods. So the best combination of method that we can have is core testing, ultrasonic pulse velocity testing, and rebound testing. Combination of all these three, right? So that is why what I have set is priority order. First, I would say core test, but I think core testing is very difficult to carry out on all the members. Still, I would put that. Yeah. Okay. Do you want to ask a question or what? Okay. Okay. Fine. Okay. So core UPV and rebound test combination is ideal thing to do. We also do non-destructive testing over last 20 years of time, and we have extensively done this. I will show you how that works. Okay. Next is core plus UPV combination you can do. Core plus rebound hammer combination you can do. UPV plus rebound hammer combination you can do. And last priority would be only rebound hammer, right? But it is very sad to know that the order of usage nowadays, out of ignorance, is like people prefer rebound hammer test first because it is very cheap, very fast, very quick, right? Which I think is a very saddening situation for structural engineering. This is what rebound hammer tells about. I will quickly go through the basics. I know most of you would be aware about this, right? It's very fast, very simple, very cost effective. The rebound number, if it is more than 40, then quality of concrete cover is good. See, I have written quality of concrete cover. I have not written strength here. Okay. For strength, you have to refer to the calibration graphs which are given by the supplier of the rebound. Okay. If it is 30 to 40, it is good. Between 20 to 30, it is fair. Less than 20, it is poor. And if rebound hammer gives hollow sound, then it means that it is delaminated surface, and we should refrain from using it, and we should try to adopt other methods of testing. Okay, but still it is being used very widely without any hesitation. Because it is very fast, very simple, and very cost effective. I have seen vendors selling rebound hammer in 5,000. I have seen good rebound hammer would cost, digital rebound hammer would cost more than 3 lakh. But I have seen people coming, taking out these rebound hammers of Chinese make, which does not have any brand, which does not have any, proven track record, and selling in 5,000. I have seen people doing rebound hammer test in 50 rupees. right? So that is a very sad situation, and I think the rebound hammer test should not be resorted to in concluding the strength of the concrete. It can be used only to get a relative idea or relative information, because there are a couple of reasons which I will tell you. It relates only to the cover concrete, the rebound hammer. The cover concrete would have been affected a lot by several other parameters, weathering effect also. For example, carbonation is one of the thing which makes your cover harder. Okay, and because if you do the rebound hammer test on a cover concrete which is already carbonated, there is all possibility that the results will shoot up by more than 50%. Okay, so even if the strength of concrete that you get as M25 or M30 on carbonated cover concrete, the actual strength of the concrete could be less than 50. Second most important thing which I would like to tell you is that rebound hammer represents only covers, even though if you interfere strength based on the calibration curves provided by the supplier, it infers strength only of the cover concrete. It does not give you an idea about the core concrete. While all our design calculations, if you look at the design calculations, the effective depth that we consider excludes the cover concrete, right? So actually assessing the strength of a cover concrete is meaningless for a structural engineer. We must assess the strength of the core concrete, right? Because all calculations of capacity of beams or columns we find, and there is a provision that we must consider only core concrete, and that is why the concept of effective depth is there, which excludes the cover concrete as well as half the diameter of the bottommost tube that we are providing in B, right? That is why I say that though this test is being widely used, I think it is irrelevant, and the use of this test should be very limited as far as structural engineer's point of view is concerned, or as far as inference of the results are concerned. Well, this should be perhaps the most reliable test for assessing the strength, in situ strength of a concrete. Okay, minimum 3 samples are required. That's what the code says. Minimum diameter shall be 3 times the maximum size of the aggregates. So if you have used 20 downsize of the aggregates, then minimum 60 of core should be taken. And the third restriction here is height to depth ratio of the core should be between 1 and 2, because the research and the calibration curves available for correction factors belongs to this range only. Of course, there is certain research which has taken place for lower H by D ratio also, but that is not endorsed by codes of practice. So we must restrict to H by D ratio of 1 and between 1 and 2 only as far as core concretes are. See, I think core not only gives you an idea about the strength of the concrete, but it also gives you a feel about the interior or the core of the major structural elements. I have put here a photograph of one of the core that we extracted from a very famous building in South Gujarat. The building has been very famous, was constructed by a famous contractor, was designed by a famous structural engineer, by a famous architect. Okay, and the core which you see has got a wood component. Okay, so people during construction they may have neglected the quality practice, and the we Gujarati in Gujarati we call lafa. These are small pieces of wood which they use for centering purpose. Okay, so this was left inside the column. This core has been extracted from a column, and we realize that a very bad construction practice would have been followed, because the core came out with a part portion of wood which you can see on this. So core also helps in interior inspection of the interior parts of the concrete, right? So it helps in visual inspection of the concrete. It gives in situ density. It also gives you density of the concrete, which is also very important to identify whether the concrete is good or not. It can give you an idea on air void content in the concrete, and it definitely helps in acceptance and rejection. Okay. Drawbacks of core test: partially destructive. Of course, it is very costly. It can be used at limited locations only. The photographs here shows from one of the occasion well foundation of a bridge. You know that the core that we extracted was almost 20 meters below the surface of the river water, normal surface of the river, right? But depending on accessibility, you can find out, you can take the samples and do it. It requires skilled operator for coring. It requires preparation of core by a skilled person. This is very important because in Neville's book it is written that if the surfaces of the cores are not prepared properly, the results could be completely different, far away from the actual results. Okay. Core removed from upper portion has lesser strength than core removed from interior portion. Right. So usually the core should be extracted from the interior portion and the cover concrete should be rejected. There are several other aspects also as far as core testing is concerned. For example, if I extract a core from the top of the column, it may give lesser strength compared to the core which I extracted from the bottom of the column. Now, everything depends on the type of quality control which has been exercised at the time of construction. Well, it is very difficult to extract cores from concrete with highly congested regions. Results will depend upon core preparation and type of material. Here I have shown one core, surface of which are prepared by using a specific material. Results would depend upon H by D ratio and appropriate correction factor should be applied. I had mentioned to you about these combination procedures, which I will skip currently. Following combination procedures may be preferred in their order of priority: core plus UPV plus rebound hammer, right? And core plus UPV, core plus rebound hammer, and UPV plus rebound. Well, this is just a hint that I am giving. I think this is available in several books also. In Bunge's book on non-destructive testing of concrete, you will find this. In several other books also, you will find this. Combination of core plus UPV plus rebound hammer. So there is a relation between all three results. Some constant A multiplied by rebound hammer reading plus some constant B multiplied by UPV reading plus some constant C is equal to natural logarithm of the core strength. Now see. What are the benefits of this combination procedure? Because cores are expensive, they are partially destructive. It is not advisable to use core testing on each and every structural elements that you see. Usually, the practice which we follow, or many other people will follow, is that you first take 30 core samples, and before taking the core samples, you do rebound hammer testing there, and you do ultrasonic also. So you have got set of 30 readings. Okay, so for those 30 readings, you have got rebound hammer number, you have got ultrasonic pulse velocity reading, and you have got force. And by using those 30 set of parameters that you have, you can use this equation by regression analysis. You can find out the values of constant A, constant B, and constant C. Okay, now on the same building, you go and take several sets of UPV and rebound hammer, right? So first 30 readings, you must have core UPV rebound hammer. On 31st reading or on 41st reading or on 50th reading, you take only rebound hammer and you take only ultrasonic pulse velocity reading, right? Now, based on those 30 sets of reading, you have got values of constant A, B, and C. So for that next set of UPV and rebound hammer reading, what you can do is you can input those values of rebound hammer and UPV reading here. You have all the values of A, B, and C based on those 30 set of parameters that you have. You can find out the core strength at that particular point from where you have done only rebound hammer and ultrasonic. I think it is very interesting thing to do because here you can save the cost also, you can save the time also, and you can appropriately use the methods which are not universally accepted, like only rebound hammer or only ultrasonic. And combination of three methods, of course, will reduce the amount of error. Okay. I should have been showing you a case study that we have done, but I think we will run out of time, so I will skip that. But let's see in the question answer section. Okay. So at least 30 reliable strength results. I mean, this is my view, personal view. Someone can say that no, we can have 40 readings. Someone can say you can have 20 readings. No issues in that. Okay. Based on these 30 reliable core results, you find out 95 percentile strength. What is 95 percentile strength? I think all of you know about this percentile strength and characteristic strength of concrete. That 95% of test results should be more than a particular value. That is called 95 percentile strength, right? So also we can find out the plus or minus variation of predicted characteristics value. That for example, I am evaluating based on these 30 samples or 100 samples, I am evaluating a particular characteristic strength, but it will have a variation of plus 10 or a minus 50. So I think this is very interesting exercise to do. So whomsoever is involved in non-destructive testing of concrete, I would suggest that this should be postulated, and this should also be percolated to our client, and awareness should be created that only rebound hammer, don't do only rebound hammer, don't do only core testing, try to resort to this type of. Okay, and once you establish these 95 percentile strength, characteristic strength of a concrete, what you do is you, for example, if the design strength of a concrete as mentioned on the drawing of a structural designer is say 25, based on this exercise 95 percentile strength you got is say 20. Okay, so now with that 20 you perform the backward calculations for resisting capacity of buildings. Okay, based on these backward calculations, if you feel that still the capacity is more than the expected demand, then strength wise the building should be okay, right? So this is the procedure for strength evaluation of concrete. Evaluation of reinforcing steel is still missing. We can take actual sample of a reinforcement, cut actual reinforcement from the there and test it and find out what is the degradation in strength of the reinforcement also, right? Size, number, location can be obtained from available methods, magnetic, radiography, radar, etc. A lot of instruments are available. Condition and corrosion can also be evaluated by several methods, right? So proof and yield strength of reinforcing steel in situ can be established by these methods. So that is related to strength evaluation. So we have cross stability assessment. We have see how do we evaluate the strength of the concrete. Okay, the building may comply to strength criteria, but what if its condition and quality is not good? So even these two parameters are not enough for assessment of structural condition of the building, because one important thing is still remaining. That is quality of concrete. Structural condition assessment can be done for quality of concrete by using all these several tests. Wherein this ultrasonic pulse velocity test, I think, is a wonderful test and gives you a very good idea about the quality of concrete. And in our code of practice, we have criteria also which sets and classify the concrete as in various categories from doubtful to excellent category. Visual inspection is a good test. I will not say it is a test, but I think it is based on the experience of a structural engineer. And here, where the experience and seniority of a structural engineer would be very useful. Okay, carbonation test, corrosion potential test, colorimeter test, chemical testing of concrete for pH, chloride, sulfate. These things are related to durability. So let us go through this test very quickly, one by one. So ultrasonic pulse velocity test, I hope all of you are familiar with this testing. So a travel time of ultrasonic pulse is measured, from which the velocity is measured, and the criteria is available for interpreting quality of concrete based on the velocity of ultrasonic pulse that we have calculated by measuring the time of travel of a ultrasonic pulse in a test bed. So for a good homogeneous dense concrete, velocity is high, and otherwise for honeycomb concrete, the velocity is high. There are three types of methods that it can be used. One is direct method, where two props can be placed on opposite sides of a structural member. There is a semi-direct method also, where two props can be placed on two perpendicular adjoining sides of a structural member. And indirect method is both the props are placed on the same plane of a member which is being tested. For example, if it is a wall, or if it is a slab, or if it is a column or a beam, whatever it is, right? So I would here again emphasize that direct method of testing is the most reliable way of doing. So please try to resort to only direct method, because semi-direct and indirect method, though a lot of research has undergone into this and certain criteria is available, but they have not been endorsed or standardized by code of practice of the countries. But this direct method has perhaps uniformly been endorsed in codes of practice of almost majority of codes of practice of different countries, right? So please try to resort to this direct method. Here I am trying to giving you some idea on what is the inference of the velocity results on the concrete quality. If the velocity by direct method is more than 4.5 kilometer per second that you get, then the quality of concrete is excellent. And if it is less than 3, then it is doubtful, Doubtful does not mean that it is the concrete is to be rejected. Doubtful means that further investigation or testing is required. Because I have seen many people, who would be saying that doubtful means that the quality is to be rejected. No, it is not said. It means that further testing is required. Okay. For indirect method also, this is available in literature, but I would not suggest a lot of use of indirect method of ultrasonic pulse velocity test. It can detect presence of voids. It is also used very effectively to measure depth of the crack. It gives Young's modulus of elasticity. It can be used to obtain strength, but a lot of calibration and research is required in that case. Results are affected by so many parameters, which is presence of reinforcement, presence of moisture, temperature, age of concrete, types of aggregates which are used, surface condition, contact pressure, path length, type of transducers that we are using, that may also affect the results. Okay. Now, condition assessments can be done by visual inspection. As I said, carbonation test. I think it is very interesting to know that carbonation has direct relation to durability of concrete and life expectancy. That is what people have come out with nowadays. And a lot of research has taken place indicating the depth of carbonation and relating it to remaining residual life of the building. In general, my observation is that I understand that all of you know about what is a carbonation and how does it affect the life of the building. And with that preamble, I am trying to suggest to you that the depth of carbonation in the region where I live or in the region, coastal region, is usually 1 millimeter per year. Ideally, should have been 1 millimeter per year. That is, if the cover concrete of a column is 40 mm, right, and the natural progression of carbonation depth would be 1 mm per year, it means at least for 40 years the reinforcement in the column should not initiate the corrosion process. In beams, 25 mm cover, so it should take at least 25 years before the initiation of corrosion starts in the bottom reinforcement of the beams or the side reinforcements of the beams. But usually we don't see this. Even buildings which are not more than 10 years old, the depth of carbonation that we obtain in columns could be around 25 millimeter or 35 millimeter. That could be because of the lack of good construction practice followed during the construction of that particular building, right? So this is half cell potential test, which is used to find out the likelihood of corrosion in embedded steel. It helps in locating areas of corroded steel in concrete, and of course, it has got this technical things about instruments that copper sulfate half cell is used. It estimates the electrical half cell potential of the reinforcement, and readings are taken on a grid of 150 mm by 150 mm, covering the area of interest. Same way, ultrasonic also and rebound hammer also, reading should be taken on grids, certain grids. It is not that you take reading only on one point and identify that this is good or this is bad. You must take readings on a grid. For example, rebound hammer, I think a grid of 4 by 4 is very much ideal. So at one point of interest, you must have at least 16 readings. And out of those 16 readings, then you have to find out an average of that, eliminating the offshoots readings, which are more than plus or minus 15%. And then you can identify that this particular area of interest is good or not. Same way for ultrasonic, same way for half cell potential also, it should be done. So we should never rely on individual one reading. It should be a grid of readings that we should take. These are the the inference of the condition assessment done by half cell potential on likelihood of corrosion. If the measured potential is more than minus 200 millivolt, then 90% probability of no corrosion. If it is less than minus 350 millivolt, 90% probability of corrosion. Right? A cover meter test is used to find out the diameter of rebar. The equipment which I have shown here is very old, and these are old photographs, but a lot of good equipments are available, which gives you corrosion mapping based on these half cell potential results or the cover meter test, right? So it gives you diameter of the rebar. It can also give you spacing of the rebar. It can also give you the depth of cover that the rebar is heavy. And these are condition assessment tests that we should resort to, which is pH value. So ideally the pH should remain in the alkaline range and should be around 12 or more for a concrete to be good enough and to be good enough to protect the reinforcement embedded steel against corrosion. The chloride content and sulfate content limits are prescribed in the codes of practice, which we should adhere to. Because it directly affects the life expectancy of the building, and we must try to resort to that chloride and sulfate should be within the permissible limit. Okay. So I think that was in a nutshell about various types of non-destructive routine methods. I have not talked about the advanced methods, but the routine methods which are related to condition assessment of a building as far as strength is concerned and quality is concerned. Okay, so stability is done for a particular case. We have done stability assessment, we have done strength evaluated, we have evaluated strength of steel, and we have found out that the concrete and steel conditions are also good in a particular building. Then what next? See, if all these criteria are satisfied, do backward analysis using evaluated material process, which earlier also we had done after strength evaluation. Okay, and that was to establish that the strength demand is less than the capacity. But now here we have to perform this backward analysis to find out that the deformations are also within permissible limits. Okay, because there are a lot of criteria which are set forth by codes of practice, again neglected everywhere. During analysis, we do everything. When we design a new building, we try to check that the drift of the building is within permissible limit, the maximum deflection or the long-term deflection of a particular beam or column is within permissible. But whenever we do that for an existing building, seldom people will do and try to find out whether the deformations with reduced strength or the new strength are within permissible limits or not, which is also an important thing to notice before we certify the safety of a building, right? So we have to do backward analysis, find out the deformations. That also includes lateral deformations, and see whether they are within permissible limits as or not. Again, that should also be followed for an individual member as well as a building as a whole, right? So once you cross these three things, first one was stability assessment, second one was strength assessment, third one is thickness assessment. If all these three criteria, and of course that condition assessment, the quality of concrete still should be good. Okay, all these four criteria are set for and everything is okay, right? We can say that it has got adequate safety margin, okay, for a building, and then we can certify the building. If not, then it would require strengthening or whatever you call repair or you call strengthening or you call retrofitting. All these are different terms related to different types of process that we need to follow to update that particular building, right? So then we need to strengthen the building. So I just jokingly I have mentioned that if everything is okay, be happy. But if everything is not okay, be more happy, because it's a very wide scope where structural engineer can use their knowledge and help people in devising a scheme for tasting of the building or repair of the building or rehabilitation of the building or strengthening of the building or you may call it threat of right. So I think this is all I just had in my mind, that I would interact with all of you, the academicians as well as professional people. There are certain things which I did not cover here, which we should keep in mind, because whatever I have presented before you is limited resources, and that should not be taken as the complete things as a whole, because we have missed on some of the advanced methods of non-destructive testing. We did not cover about the actual load testing. We did not cover about the actual load assessment also, because code also says that you must first assess the load that is acting, that is likely to act on the structure, right? We did not cover the foundation checking also, because there are a lot of criteria which indicates that difference in settlement. For example, one important thing which I would like to mention is rarely any of us is checking for differential settlement. You tell me how many of you have checked that a particular building will satisfy the criteria of differential settlement as proposed in relevant codes of practice? Perhaps no one, right? This presentation also did not cover about the vibration analysis, because these all are subject in its own and will need a lot of deliberations and time. But we must keep in mind that whatever we did today, we did not do this. Okay, so through this, I just wanted to establish that assessment of the building is not as simple as being treated as present. It's a very systematic process, very much identified process, which should have been followed, right? And we must educate the society about the complexities which are involved. because unless and until we don't educate them about the complexities, they will not give you respect that we deserve. I believe that most of you who are attending this webinar, I mean almost all of you are civil engineers, or majority of you are structural engineers. That is what I believe, because the topic relates to structural engineering. Do you feel that structural engineers get enough respect in the society? I personally believe that structural engineering requires highest level of intellect, analytical skill. It requires highest level of intellect, logical skills, logical reasoning, logical analysis, everything. Still, I should not say this in an open forum, but I feel that people have been submitting, stability certificates and other things with meager price of 5,000 rupees or 10,000. Is this what we are meant for? I don't think so. Right? We should be very proud about what we do. That is first thing. We should be very proud about what we have gone through, what we have learned. That is the next thing that I will tell you. Where that perhaps a time was there when all the toppers in the 12th examination used to opt for civil engineering. That was an era before me, right? Because civil engineering relates to everything in life. Okay. Now you tell me, if I am designing or you are designing, say, a building which is a 10-story building. Let us not talk too high about it. Each building is having 4 flats on each floor. So total 40 flats are there in that particular building, right? Okay. And average occupancy in that 2-bedroom flat would be around 4 people. So when you are designing a 10-story building with 4 flats on each floor, 40 flats, 160 people staying in that building. Okay. You are designing this building, it means that you are respecting the life of 160 people. Am I right or not? When I designed one job as a structural engineer, I am playing with life of 140 people. We should be very responsible for this. Not only that, but we must communicate this to the society, that see, society has a very weird phenomenon of calling everyone who is saving them their life as sir, sire. When you go to doctor, you always tell him sire. You give him lot of respect. Why you give them lot of respect? Of course, they deserve it. I am not saying they deserve it, but from our part, the other point of view, why we are giving them a lot of respect? Because we feel that he can save our life. Because we feel that if we are sick, he can get us back on track. Because he's playing with our life. But my friends, what I want to tell you is that when doctor deals with one case, okay, he deals with one life. And still, because society knows it, the society respects them, which they deserve. When he deals with one life, he get a lot of respect. Tell me, my friends, that when you design a building which deals with 150 life, you must also get respect, which is equivalent to that of doctors. But we don't get it. We just surrender and become subservient to our clients. That is why I written that we should stop being subservient to our clients. We need to make them realize that we are the people who deal with safety of life. And when I take one project of a 10-story building, I deal with life of at least 160 people at a time. And therefore, it is my right to get fairly good amount of respect, not only respect, fairly good amount of fees and charges for that. Because see, government has spent a lot of money in making you be civil, or making you postgraduate in civil engineering, or in your doctorate, right? So I think we must realize our own potential. We must develop a good self-esteem and collectively try to communicate to the society that we are very responsible and we are very important people in the society, because we also deal with life of people as other people are dealing. Therefore, we need a fairly good amount of respect from society, fairly good amount of remuneration. I will get back to you on this. Just a simple thing, which is a personal matter, which I want to share you. Like I didn't knew about what my value is, but when I worked with some of the Middle East companies, and the Middle East company, without telling me, they used to charge for me. Like if I work on behalf of that Middle East famous consulting company, and I go to attend a meeting on their behalf, the company used to charge $500 an hour for Nilesh Shah. Okay, that is the value that we carry as a structural engineer. But I still see people who are working as a structural engineer at a meager fees of 2 rupees a square feet, or 3 rupees a square feet, or 4 rupees a square feet. I think collectively we should get rid of this. I will tell you one simple thing, my dear friends. I hope I know the Gujarati word for this. That hacking actually is the English word. In buildings, before RCC work, everything is done. You know, you hack the structural members. Why do you hack it? Because you want to have a good surface on which plaster can stay for longer duration of time. You can apply good plaster and the bond is improved. So hacking is done. In Gujarati, we call it tacha marwa. और in Hindi also I think we call it कि टांचा टांचा मारने का जरूरत है, right? So single person will come, he has got only one instrument which is that kind of hathodi, you know, with that two legs, which he will just strike on the surfaces and leave those impressions, deep impressions over there on which you can apply plaster. What you know, what are the charges that the client or the builder or you pay to that person who is doing hacking? You pay him at least 1.25 rupees a square feet. Okay, 1.25 rupees a square feet, not only slab area, but also exposed areas of columns and exposed areas of beam sides and beam bottoms also. So in fact, that single person, in fact, he charges at least 2 rupees a square feet of slab area without any education, without any analysis, without any design. Okay, right? And with so much amount of education, with a doctorate degree, with a postgraduate degree, we are still struggling to get a fees of rupees 3 or 4 per square feet. No, scenario should change. Scenario should change. I feel people have also been working at 1% of the fees. If some of you have bought a property through a broker, the broker will charge 1% from you, the buyer, and 1% from the one who is a seller. So he gets a fees of 2%. And with all these responsibilities and all this knowledge that we have, still we are restricting ourselves to a fees of 1%. Broker does not have any responsibility when he deals with an asset. Okay, so he gets 2% without any responsibility, and we happily pay them, right? But that's not the scenario. So with this, a note that I think we need to understand our potential. Apart from understanding the potential of entity or buildings, we need to develop a good self-esteem. Okay, so that each building that we design, I think we can display the following things, which I have been telling over last so many years, but no one does this. The safety margin for stability is so much, safety margin for serviceability is so much, safety margin for strength is so much. While what is demanded by code of practice is this. Okay, that's what I just wanted to interact with you, all of you, and thank you very much for a very good participation. I may have overshooted the time limit to more than 1 hour and 30 minutes, which was allocated to me, but I hope it's going to be fruitful. And if time is available, open for questions. Over to you, Darshan. Thank you very much. Okay. Okay. I just need to stop my screen share, right? I am just looking forward to that so that I can. Okay, it's stop sharing. Okay, fine. So that's done. Yeah, we can go ahead with the questions if people have that in. Well, I mean, it is a very tricky question, and there is no clear-cut identification. But core cutting is not actually a non-destructive testing; it is a partially destructive testing. So, but still, a lot of people, will try to incorporate that as a part of non-destructive testing because small cores, big structural elements, and when you extract it from slabs, what happens is slabs usually in analysis and design slabs are not considered for overall behavior of frame, except that it is a rigid diaphragm. Right. So there are different schools of thoughts on this. People may say it is a destructive testing. I believe it is a partially destructive test and should be used very judiciously under the guidance of a structural engineer only. That from where it is to be extracted, how many cores to be extracted for a particular reason. So I think it is not actually a non-destructive test. I will say it is a partially destructive test. Uh, Well, I think all applicable methods for building repair should also be applicable for bridges. Several methods are available. That includes kind of, I mean, if you are talking about strengthening or just condition assessment kind of thing, because see, injection grouting is available, then you can do jacketing also, jacketing with different types of materials. You can use micro concrete also, you can use high strength concrete also, you can do graniting also. You can also use fiber wraps. You can also use steel plates to bond with structural members to improve their strength. So it depends on case to case situation, right? What exact situation is there? But I mean, generally speaking, all different methods which are available for buildings should also be available for bridges. There shouldn't be any, it is just a method that which method will be better for a particular situation. So that depends on the visual inspection that we carry out, type of member that we are talking about, and also depends upon the type of the results that we have thought. Okay. See, when we talk about durability, the first and the most important thing is whatsoever good analysis you do, whatsoever good design you do, whatsoever good lateral load analysis, everything, demand, supply, capacity, everything you do, whatsoever amount of moment diagram, shear force diagrams you will do, foundation design you will do, it is not going to work unless you have got construction which is a quality construction, right? So for durability, I feel major emphasis should be there on quality of construction. So whatever you have emphasis on design should be achieved, and not in terms of strength but in terms of quality also. So better quality of material should be used. The process of using those materials or the ways and means of using this material should also be adhered to the codal practice. A good quality monitoring system should be established on site. That is very important. For new construction also, you can resort to non-destructive testing. Like for example, if columns and beams have been casted, after 7 days, you can invite for non-destructive testing to get ultrasonic pulse velocity results. And if you find something wrong there, you can immediately take action on that. So quality construction is the essence of durability. I was expecting, very much expecting this question because there are no guideline available all over the country about the number of samples that we should take on course. So I believe it should be best left to the structural engineer in charge, and he should because whenever testing is done, there are several agencies who are not structural engineers. Like for example, if we are doing testing, I myself is a structural engineer and we do the testing, we get involved in this. But there are several agencies where structural engineers are not available. They are just into they may be NABL approved, but they are just into the testing business. Okay, so I think you must hire the structural engineer who has designed that particular building, or if he's not available, you must hire some other structural engineer. Upon his guidance, you must decide on number of core samples that should be taken, and the location of core samples are also very important. If I'm talking about a building which has got an area of more than, I will say, 50 to 60